Hello, and welcome back to my intermittently occurring stream. I'm Amitai. As you can see on the right side of your screen, the things I mainly stream on, and no exception today, are notqmail, an open source email server derived from Qmail, package source, a cross-platform package manager for Unix systems, originally for NetBSD, but also for Mac OS and Linux and whatever else you got. And IkiWiki, a mostly static site generator, one of the earliest entries of that genre. And today, no exception, like I said, we'll be working on something adjacent to not Qmail. I'm trying to get my brain back in order. It's been a while since I had time for any kind of work, including open source work. And so what I'm working on today is the same project that when I got far enough with it, uh, just a moment, please. Got a kid. What do you need? Good quiet time will be slightly extended because kid can't stay in room. We'll try again. Like I was saying, we are today working on a project that is adjacent to notqmail. It's something you can use with notqmail, and I do. But originally I used it with Qmail because there wasn't notqmail at the time. And it was the success of this project, which is mine, my sole project, only me. When I got far enough with it, I thought maybe I'm capable of being a developer with other developers on what's left of the Qmail system, and maybe we could do something collaborative. And that's what became not Qmail. So I would like to bring my attention and my brain back to that community, which has been very patiently trying to keep things going in my absence. But to do that, I thought it would be useful to warm myself up without bothering any of them on code that is very, very related to it. And that's this project, acceptutils. Let me show you what this project is about. My browser up over here. I'll do this very quickly because I've introduced it a bunch of times. Uh, do I have my magic remote control handy here? I do. We are in luck. I do. It might even work. So in a very brief description, acceptutils is an alternative, yeah, it works, is an alternative to what has already existed for Qmail systems over the years, which is to say patches for the Qmail system or Qmail derived systems that make it link the SMTP service that runs on your port 25 and the SMTP client that connects to other systems on port 25, because the mail server has to have both of those. It makes both of those programs link with OpenSSL and adds enough, the application level protocol using TLS underneath. And those have worked for a lot of people, including me. And in fact, right now I'm using half of that patch. I'm using the Qmail remote half. That's the client half. Because I haven't yet made that unnecessary. But I did make... What happened to my poor camera? Did it come loose? What's going on? Sorry for the trouble. The camera is an iPhone that is claiming not to be connected. I'll show you not connected. Okay, let's see. The same not connected as it was before. Huh. Let's get back into camo. There you go. Thanks, phone. Appreciate the whatever that was. And we should be back. Am I? Can it work? Not yet. Even different now. iPhone. Camo camera. Switch it up. Switch it back. Think about it. Yeah, okay. All right, sorry for the hiccup. Not sure why that is. Been a while since I streamed. I'm probably out of shape. Anyway, here we are looking at. Is it not showing the whole screen? It is not showing the whole screen. Why? So OBS repainted the whole. Okay, that does look fine. Very well. OBS looked like it wasn't painting the same scene, but it is. Okay. Interruptions continue. We were trying to explain that I have managed to get rid of the need for half of this patch that has existed historically to link directly with OpenSSL. And there are lots of reasons to use what was provided, but there are also, I find, lots of reasons to try to make it unnecessary and get the functionality a different way, a way whose architecture fits better into the qmail architecture. And so this was a project that I didn't think I would ever get very far with, but I pleasantly surprised myself and did. And it replaces half of that patch. It replaces the half for connections coming inbound to your port 25 on your mail server. So that's about as far as I need to explain it now. And there are some bugs and there's some things I need to change. And before I even get to those, and actually a new feature I want to add, before I get to those, I was coming back to my work tree and thinking I should come back to this work tree and stream about it, but I have a bunch of uncommitted, half-finished things. And so I'm just going to stream. This is not going to be the best stream of the year for anybody, but it might be interesting. What is sitting around in my tree? And how can I either decide that, if it's a documentation change, maybe I can just commit it or fix it and commit it. If it's a code change, I probably don't remember what I was on about, and I should write down what it looks like I was trying to do and then throw it away. So let's come back to that code. And the sooner we get this tree to a clean state, the sooner I can be thinking about what next change I can use my brain and my attention to make. So let's take a look at the git status. As you can see, there's a bunch of untracked files, which are things that don't really affect whether I can proceed with commits to this project, but also changes to existing files, which do affect how I could proceed with this project. And so I noticed that one of the files I have here not committed is called backlog. And I thought I could probably write down my notes in there of what I was thinking about. And that's what's at the top now. Cataloging uncommitted work in progress so I can clear it. That's what I have now. So that's what we're doing today. Or if it goes super quickly, maybe that's part of what we're doing today. But I think it's what we're doing today. So the first thing I noticed, is that, let's go tmux. If I do a git diff on the make file, then you can see that in fixsmtpio, which is one of the components of acceptutils, there is a new object file being linked. This lists that as a dependency, and this does the actual linking. So I'm guessing that somewhere in the fixsmtpi code, I tried to use timeoutread.h, probably in place of the system read.h, so that something that would maybe benefit from a timeout would have one. So this is just a make file change. I don't even think it's so trivial, and I already wrote down over here. So I think I'm just gonna undo that change. No, there's no change. So that's good. That's done. What's the next thing I could be thinking about? Clear, get status again. Fix smtpio.c. What's happening there? Yeah, look at that. We were talking about timeout reads, and this thing looks like it is setting a timeout of 1200 seconds. And this looks like a thought that I had, and I don't know why I was having it, and I don't know if it works, and I don't know if it works for the purpose that I had in mind, because I don't remember what purpose I had in mind. So I think my job now is to write down that I was thinking about SMTP timeout of 1200 in fix SMTPIO, and that subsumes the make file change. If I come back to this and I'm thinking about it again, I know that I have to put that object in. That's not interesting enough to save. So the thought that I was thinking is this one. SMTP timeout was going to be like that. Adding a function load SMTP timeout int timeout, calling it from main. And that's all that was. And that's enough for me to say, reads from control timeout SMTPD. I probably would independently think of that again. Yeah. Yeah. And I also want to add this. I think the most important thing I should write down that I didn't yet is the XXX. This should be the same as the child's timeout because this is a proxy program, so it has a child process. But how? So this is probably part of why I didn't finish with this, is that I didn't know how to make that be true, and I'm probably not totally sure. I probably wasn't totally sure that I needed a timeout in my process at all if the child has one. I probably need to test more about that to be sure. XXX, this should be the same as the child's timeout. But how? Okay, and with all of those notes, then this too is nothing I need to keep. Now we're on to fix smtpio die.h and see. What did I change in the header? I added a die alarm. Oop. Adding die alarm to fix smtpio die.ch. Hey, I do know how to type sometimes. Die error flash timeout. Okay, totally boring. So fix smtpio die both of those. Now we are getting down in our list here. Fix smtpio event queue is a thin wrapper around the BSD event queue macros. For now, that's actually a to-do item here from a long time ago. Some systems don't provide sysq.h, and then this code doesn't compile. So I need to, at some point, decide what I'm doing about that. Not today. Today I'm just trying to cut down what I was doing here. What was I doing here? What's the difference between tail Q and S tail Q? Can we find out? What's a good way to see about the Q macros? Can I say tail Q in it and wind up there? Yes. Nice. So then what I was saying instead was stailq init, right? Does that exist in this manual page? Stailq init. What's the difference between tailq and stailq? Let's start. These macros, I'm looking at description. These macros define and operate on 4 types of data structures. Singly linked list, singly linked tail queues. Sounds like what I wanted there. Lists and tail queues. All 4 structures support insert at the head, insert after any element, O1 removal of an entry from the head, ON removal of any entry, and forward traversal. And so why would I be looking at stailq in particular? I assume, okay. So slist is a singly linked list. Stailq is a singly linked tail queue. So is there a difference between tail queue and singly linked tail queue? Tail queue, the elements are doubly linked so that an arbitrary element can be removed without traversing the tail queue. New elements can be added to the tail queue after, before, at the head, or at the tail. So maybe this is why. Let's come back to where stailq comes from. Uh, Singly linked tail queue are singly linked for minimum space and pointer manipulation overhead at the expense of O sub n removal for arbitrary elements. So that's the thing. I don't think I'm ever removing arbitrary elements or inserting in a different position. Although it doesn't seem like I'm punished for that. Maybe that's what I was thinking about, is that I'm only... I think that's enough for me to write down the idea. Let's look at that diff again. Yeah, okay, so thinking about replacing tailq with stailq in eventq.c, probably because I don't ever remove from the middle. Let's take a quick look at the code, but I think that's true. So this is a bunch of routines. Maybe the H file is good first for me. Yeah, so we have an event queue put and an event queue get. This is greatly simplified from the BSD macros, which I had never used before and didn't want to have to expose that API. I only wanted to expose the API that I want to use. And that way I could replace the implementation, which I might need to do because it's not universally available. And so here's the API I care for. I want to be able to put constant string in there on whatever the event queue is. I don't want to have to know what it is. I just want to put it. And then I want to be able to get back whatever's in the first or last or whichever position it is that it was. And that's it. So then that corroborates that I don't have to remove things from the middle. I never pass a position when I'm popping something off this queue. So I can't remove from the middle. There's no way that I let myself do it. So that has got to be it. But I haven't tested this, and I'm certainly not going to finish thinking about it now. So after visually verifying that all the changes are those, let's see if there's a handy way to just look at those lines. If it's the beginning of the line and then either a minus or plus, is this gonna work? No. Is that gonna work? No. Is this gonna work? Yeah. Okay, so here's the file that I'm diffing. And then tail Q to STLQ, tail Q to STLQ. Yes, the only changes are that. So I'm just going to say that we are not making this change now. And on to the next one. What was I thinking about in Munge? It's just a comment. It's in Munge greeting. Greeting is what you get when you first connect to an SMTP service. So that's a greeting right there. And this being a proxy that changes some of the lines of request or response, the greeting is one of the things that it sometimes changes. So I added myself a couple notes. Hey, what if? Which means I was thinking about something. So let's say thinking about a couple edge cases in Munge greeting. Uh, what if qmail smtpd gives 222 or something? Not 220. Not a literal 220. Because you may recognize this from HTTP, which is inspired in part by SMTP that we're looking at here. Codes in the 200s mean success. Your request was successful or your connection was successful. So I don't know exactly, I don't have the spec for SMTP memorized. And also there are several specs, one of each of which has replaced or added to the previous specs. But I do know that it seems conceivable someday that an SMTP service would say, okay, with a number that isn't exactly 220. It just seems to do that for the services that I've seen. And so maybe I want to match a little more liberally and preserve the code that the server said, instead of what you can see my code doing here, which is that I put a literal 220. And then I guess that's the second part. What if it said something besides ESMTP? Well, it doesn't matter. What I'm saying is ESMTP. So maybe I should be preserving those elements of the server's response in case they are different. So that's a good way to say it. Thinking about accurately, or thinking about preserving server's actual response in Munge greeting. What if it gives 222? What if email SMTPD gives something other than ESMTP? Yeah, because if they did say that, then I'm lucky. Those are the things that I'm saying instead, and they're the same. So there's no difference. But if they were trying to say something else, then that's hidden from the client. And when that's desirable, that's why I have a proxy. But this wouldn't necessarily be desirable to hide that from the client. So there's that. And with that, I can clear that one out. What have I done to proxy? Okay. I made myself a note. I wanted to log when TLS. Yes. So one of the things that my code does, thanks to its parent process, which is an UXPy TLS compatible program, like SSL server or S6 networking's S6 UXPy TLSD, in cahoots with the parent program, which actually does link with OpenSSL or BareSSL or whichever SSL it wants to. That doesn't have to be my concern, and that's part of why I have been writing this code, is to support encryption at the application level without the application having to deal with particular encryption libraries. Get it out of my address space, get it out of my cognitive load, get it out of my APIs that I have to learn how to use correctly, um, and just make it easy to swap. If it turns out that a different encryption implementation is better, that doesn't matter to my code. That's at a different layer of the architecture. And so, yes, one thing that I do want to do is probably log exactly when TLS has been negotiated. That might be something I want to put in the logs. And so let's take a look at where I wrote this. I would like to see. It looks like an almost. Yeah, so we are in the main read loop of this program, which I call read and process until either end closes. Has a lot of state variables passed in. Maybe it should just be a context object, but right now it's a bunch of individual variables. That's been fine. TLS level is a local for what has the sysadmin configured, requested, and that can be that it's not supported at all, in which case we won't make it available to be negotiated. That's what happens if you don't have a patch or you don't have one of these programs that can handle TLS for you. And it might be that you have these programs, but in an individual instance or for a particular connecting IP address, you don't want it to be available. And so it's configurable to be off. It's also configurable to be mandatory, that before proceeding with any further transfer, that TLS has to have happened, has to have been negotiated up to that. And then the most common thing for port 25 services is that it is available and you can upgrade to TLS. And so most port 25 services, that's how they'll be configured, but that's a runtime decision. And so that has to be determined here. Want TLS has to do with if the request that the client just made is to upgrade to TLS, and so on and so forth. Anyway, we were looking for, I have some other notes here for bugs in the program, but they're not new, so I don't have to revert them. And this, I believe, I have to look at the email that I was sent from a very good bug report a couple years ago now. I believe that the right thing to do here is uncomment this, and it will make an occasional bug that I see in production go away. But I have to look at that bug report and I have to reproduce it. It was a very good report from somebody named Malte Tancred, I believe, and hopefully I'm pronouncing that close enough to write. It was in private mail, and it was a very good analysis, including how to reproduce it. And that's exactly how much time I've had, is that I haven't even gotten to... All I got to do was say thank you for the bug report, but I didn't get to do anything with it yet. I think this is the code that it's about. And then the code that I may want to commit or revert today, because it's the change in this file, is that if we got here, then what I wrote down here from whenever I wrote it down is that I could log that TLS has just about begun. That seems a little weird. I feel like I would want to log maybe when it was asked for, and if it turns out that a separate statement is needed for when it actually started, then maybe both of those. This seems like a weird thing to say. So let me write down what my intention might have been, which is thinking about logging when TLS has begun in proxy.c. And secondarily, maybe also log when TLS has been requested, in case those don't turn out to both happen every time. I can't think about that right now. Maybe they both happen or neither happens, or maybe it could be requested and then it doesn't manage to get negotiated. I could actually imagine how that's true. If the cipher suite between the client and the server, for example, don't have any common ciphers, then that would be a way that TLS would be requested and then it would be unable to be negotiated. So, okay. in case negotiation fails. And then that could be mildly interesting. Um, that's something that happens in the TLS handling program, which is not mine. It's a parent program that we run under. But at the application level, that's an important thing to observe and to be able to report and have some details. So that looks helpful to me. And I think if I go like this, then I no longer have that diff. That's it. It was just the one line. So what's left? How are we doing? Access MTPI read write. I bet this is also to do with the timeout. Yes. Um, um, right. Also, using timeout read calling from safe read in. Whoa! I don't even know what that was. Okay, let's try that again. In safe. No, in read write. Let's see. And that's what that is. So we're including timeout read. We expect there to be a global timeout defined in whatever we're linking. And it will be because we linked in timeout read.o. And then instead of read on the file descriptor, a buffer, and a length, we call timeout read from that header file. Same three variables, but also the timeout value. And then I don't know where I got this from, but I'm sure I could get it again. So I think that means that we got back to merely things that are not committed and not changes to files that are committed. Let's look at what we have here. What is this? Okay. Yeah, I got notes all over the place. Okay, that doesn't say a lot. But I guess I could throw it in here. Possibly to defend against buggy oops by TLS implementations. Seems SSL server should have killed me in some timeout case. See notes.app. I'll do that part later. And then I don't need this separate file. What else have I written about? Auth protocol modules. Auth got big. Oh yeah, okay. Mailfront does this nicely. Yeah, let's take a quick look at what I'm talking about, and then I think I can put this into my backlog. Auth.c. Auth is a cool program. Let me tell you why. It's derived from two pieces of code. One of them is qmail popup, as provided in qmail, which is it speaks a tiny bit of the pop email protocol for fetching email, just enough to read the user and the pass commands, and any other pop command that says, oh, I don't know what those are. And so this works really well in the POP3 protocol as something that can run first and parse those two strings off the network and then call a different program to check the password. And that's how this works. And so qmail popup has to run as root in a common scenario because the check password program that it calls has to run as root to look at the system password database. Other check password implementations use a virtual database and the permissions could be different, but that's how it works for POP. So I took this code nearly unchanged and then started merging in a second piece of code, which was a patch that had been going around for qmail SMTPD to give it some kind of authentication support. And I never really liked how that worked. I can show you briefly. It looked like, you can see part of this picture is, the whole picture is weird, but this part of the picture is the weirdest. And that's what that patch was doing. You would run out a TCP server to get authentication. You would have a qmail SMTPD running as itself, and then it would call check password based on this patch. And then check password, needing a child program that exits 0, you would pass it bin true or user bin true, which is not usually how it's used. Usually you give it a real command to run in the context of the authenticated user. And so I never liked this authentication patch, and when I realized that I could come up with a way that used check password more idiomatically, then I would much rather do that. And so I took the patch and all of the authentication stuff it did, and I merged it into auth-up, which runs as root, just like qmail pop-up did, calls a check password. This is for your submission service on port 587, which then calls a small proxy program, and which makes this program, your submission mail program, seem like it was always willing to run under check password, even though I didn't know about that at the time. So no patching required here. And with that, you can use the original check password program as intended. This is how it looks for POP3. This is how it looks for mail submission with my code, with auth-up. So that's what auth-up does. It has implementations of authentication for POP3 and for SMTP that do just enough of those two protocols to call check password with the strings that it parsed out. And that makes it relatively safe to run as root, is that it doesn't do anything else. It parses a couple strings using DJB's string parsing library, and then it calls a different program to do the work from there, which is not mine. So that's auth-up. And the to-do item here was saying auth-up got big. It's one file, and it's, by the standards of these small programs, it's big. It's 674 lines, and most of them are functions that are parallel, and half of them get chosen if the protocol you're talking about is SMTP, and the other half get chosen if it's POP3. And so it would be kind of nice, even though there are only the two protocols, maybe it's a good idea if I have some kind of a plugin architecture where it's defined which functions need to be implemented, and then there's a POP3 implementation, and there's an SMTP implementation. What I have now is going to be just like a function lookup table somewhere here. Yeah, you can see POP3 commands are these, SMTP commands are these. And then I do have kind of a thing that's in common between the two of them. There's a protocol, and there's all these things about a protocol. So I feel like I'm partway there, and maybe it would benefit the program to split out the generic logic and then the protocol-specific logic into two other files. So that's the thought there. I'm gonna go down below where anything says bug, and then I'm gonna write that down. Here's good. Auth up. You know what? Better. Let's read the file in. Yeah. Nice and lazy. Okay. And then get rid of that. Backlog is the one we're working on. What's happening with block list? Oh, right. Okay. So this has to do with the next item in our file. NetBSD, which is my primary server operating system, that's where my mail server runs, has a program that kind of connects, it provides an API to applications and a configurability to sysadmins so that sysadmins can configure how many authentication failures, for example, are too many from a particular IP in a particular span of time on a particular network application. And then Blacklist D can instruct the packet filter, the NetBSD firewall, NPF, at runtime in an automated way. You've probably seen things that do this that watch log files for particular patterns and then update with a script the system firewall and just block that address for some amount of time. And this is just a little bit rationalized. Like if you were going to design a feature for that, how would you design it? Well, you'd provide an API for applications to opt in so they could report events, and you would provide some kind of integration with the system packet filter, because there would be one that you could expect to integrate with. And then you would define some kind of configuration format, probably a lot like the one that people use when they're doing log scraping, for what the rules should be on that system. So anyway, it was called Blacklist D, and then it was renamed to Blocklist D, which I happen to think is a better name. But it also means that for some duration of time in NetBSD, we have to look for the old name after we look for the new name, and we would find the old name. And I would still like to build in that scenario. And so this is just a note. I probably wrote this down when, yeah, and the important thing, let's read that in. Right. So enough of that file. Uh, I started to integrate Blacklist D at the time, Blacklist D now support into, I guess it would have been AuthUp, because that's the one that has authentication in it, and ran into what seemed like design decisions in Blacklist D that would not interoperate well. Combined with would not interoperate well. Combined with, it's coming back to me now. Combined with the obligations of a TCP server or TCP server alike program. In the case of regular old TCP server, the same file descriptor that the connection came in on is the file descriptor that your child program or application will get. And I think in that case you could count on Blacklist D to work, because it needs to know where you're reading and writing and that you have permission to be reading and writing from there. However, that is not one of the guarantees of OOCS by TCP. It's just how it happens to be in the naive TCP server case. With OOCS by TLS, an extension to OOCS by TCP, when you upgrade from plain text to TLS encrypted connections, you will for sure get a different file descriptor. And in that case, Blacklist D doesn't trust what you report. I think that's how it worked. And so I checked with the author, with Christos Zoulas, fellow NetBSD developer, fellow New Yorker, and he explained the security principles for Blacklist D, and I couldn't disagree that it should be done differently. It's just unfortunate. And so I think I deferred thinking about this any further. And then at some point it got renamed and I wrote myself a note, so I just added that note here. Let's look real quickly if I have anything about Blacklist. Yeah. Yeah, it looks like I started to do it. Let's look at what I started to do. It would be an acceptutils pfilter.c. And right now it's all named Blacklist because that's what it was named at the time. So it looks like I was trying to, I was trying to follow the Blacklist API using the environment variables about the connection that a TCP server or any other OOCS by TCP server program would provide. So for example, If it's an IP version 4 connection, then you might expect to find it as the TCP remote IP and TCP remote port, a TCP local port. Is that right? Yeah, maybe. uh, if it's for sure IP version 6, it depends on the UX by TCP server implementation, if it'll be under these names or else these names. And so I think my logic there all works. Uh, but this is the part where you notify the packet filter. Um, yeah, and this is in the case where you don't have blacklist support. In the case where you do have blacklist support, this is the meaningful pfilter notify implementation. And I'm supposed to fill in a sock adder info, and then I'm supposed to pass it in to blacklist SA, and either it worked or it didn't. And I think I was getting a lot of didn't. So that code is here, but it doesn't, I think, work in the generic case. So maybe I should be, is this guaranteed to be compiled out even if blocklist is present? Or is it okay with me that it may or may not work depending on the UXPy TCP implementation? All right, I think that's all about that. Event queue. Right. This has to do with what we found here. Where was it? Right. There's no sysq.h on void Linux. It turns out it's not just void Linux, and in fact, there's different void Linux libc implementations. And so I learned more about this since then, and I can update my notes. And it can just be inline in the backlog. And it looks like what I'm saying here, this is cool. Let's get rid of it. I'm saying that if I look at test fix smtpio event queue, here are all my expectations for how my event queue API works. And I could replace the implementation and find out if the tests pass, and if they do, then it would work for the application. So this is pretty handy. Let's look at what those are. I assert right away that if I try to do an event queue get, but there was nothing put on the queue, then I should get a timeout off the event queue. So that seems like an application specific behavior. Normally from a queue, you would expect a null or an exception or something if you pop an empty one. But in this case, we're calling it a timeout event. I don't know why that's true, but that is what I put there. Now we start to put something in, and if we pop it, cool. And I guess I could assert again that if I get again, that I get a timeout again. Just to show that the thing was really removed. I guess that would be fair to do. Event queue put bar baz and quux, and then get a bar, a baz, a quux, and a timeout. Okay, so I did test that. Just a little more involved. So that's it. This shows the order, that the first in is the first out. That's a queue as opposed to a stack. Last in, first out. Okay, so then this is cool. I can't remember when I wrote these tests. I can find out now. A while ago. And so that's enough for me to know that I could replace the queue implementation anytime I had it available. Okay, on to the next one. Remote utils, I can tell you right now what that is. These are thoughts about the other half of the problem. Remember we were talking about the TLS patch for qmail that patches the port 25 server program, and it patches the client SMTP program with which your server talks to other servers. And so acceptutils thus far is a solution to the incoming encryption on port 25 and submission on port 587, because that is substantially similar architecturally to port 25. The differences are that port 25 typically does not require TLS but wants it to be available. Port 587 wants to require it, and that's because port 587 authentication is mandatory, but you only really want to do that after encryption has happened, so you're not throwing plain text identifiers around over the network. And on port 25, you don't really want authentication to be available. The only reason you want encryption is to improve the transport security of an incoming message. But besides that, there are programs that read standard in, write standard out, run under inetd or TCP server or an SSL-enabled TCP server. And so that half of the problem is solved by acceptutils. The other half of the problem of upgrading to an encrypted connection when we are a client sending messages to other servers is architecturally related, but sufficiently different that it should be a separate effort and probably a separate repo or a separate branch in the repo. And I'm imagining calling it remote utils because I have reject utils that are programs that you can use to selectively not accept messages on port 25 if they're egregiously wrong enough. Without accepting them and then putting them in the spam folder, you just reject them at the moment that they're presented to your server if they meet certain criteria. Those are reject utils. Acceptutils are tools for getting your messages accepted, so authentication and encryption and so on. I might change the names now that I've started to see how this is shaping up, but that's what they're called. And following that, remote utils. And what I would like to do is basically, it's not an original idea. It's actually been implemented in part elsewhere by somebody who's smarter and faster than I am. It's to take the qmail remote program, which is the client that speaks to other systems on port 25, on their port 25, and make it follow the same OOCS by TCP pattern that the servers do. And so right now what qmail remote does is it has networking code in it. qmail SMTPD never did, which means that when IP version 6 gets invented, there's no application code that has to change. Only the OOCS by TCP implementation has to add IP version 6 support. And then file descriptor 0 for qmail SMTPD is still file descriptor 0, and the application protocol is still the application protocol. No change whatsoever. And that's a nice architectural split because precisely for reasons like this, when transport changes, you want your application not to have to. And so qmail remote, for a variety of historical reasons, doesn't make this separation, but it seems like it could, and I've seen proof of concept, it exists, that it could run under, there's a corresponding program to TCP server called TCP client. And so just as qmail SMTPD runs under TCP server, qmail remote could be adapted to remove all that networking code and run under TCP client. And then, given that it runs under TCP client, it could be adapted further to run under SSL client or S6 OOCS by TLS-C from S6 networking, and add a little application code to be able to negotiate with the remote server. When the remote server advertises start TLS, then we can communicate back to our parent process via OOCS by TLS that we want that and get that. And then speak TLS from there on out. And that will take a little bit of application change, but only application change at that point. And when we have that, then the other half of the TLS patch from ages ago becomes unnecessary also. qmail remote doesn't have to link with OpenSSL. It doesn't have to link with any encryption code of any kind. because it runs as the child of a program that provides a constrained API. When you want encryption, you write a particular byte to a particular socket, and then it gives environment variables with the new file descriptors that you should be reading and writing from. And you switch to those, and that's the rest of your application. And it keeps all of this stuff out of your address space. It keeps OpenSSL bugs. It runs them as a different user. So there are lots of reasons to want this. One of which is that Qmail already has this architecture. And so with a little effort, this component of Qmail could have the same architecture, and then it could gain the same benefits of being transport agnostic, IP version 6, or in the proof of concept I've seen, not even TCP, but something called curve CP could be the transport, and Qmail Remote doesn't have to care. It just needs a transport. IP version 6, TLS, whatever else you have, all that stuff can be outside the scope of the program, except for the application level logic. And so we want that, and that's going to be a separate project. I would love to be the one to do it. I would also love to be the one to discover that someone else has done it in the way that I would want to do it, or more carefully. So this is a to-do, but it's a separate project. It's something that excites me, but I don't know when I will be able to get to do it. That's remote utils. What's going on with size? Huh. Okay. Right, there's an extension to SMTP called size. Right now, what happens in QML SMTPD and probably with OFMIPD on port 587 also is that there is some maximum number of bytes that a server can send. Just a moment, please. Tom, are you having trouble staying in your room? 245. What? 245. 245. Yeah. Okay. Um, yeah, so what happens de facto is that there either is some explicit limit of how many bytes a message can contain, and as soon as the client has sent that many, then the server rejects it. Or worse, after the message has been attempted to be submitted, then the server rejects it. That's very bandwidth and time consuming and resource consuming on the server and the client. So there's an extension to SMTP where the server can say, here's the maximum size. And if the client supports that extension, then it can know before it tries whether it's going to work or not. And that saves everybody some trouble. So these are some notes of me thinking about this at some point. Remember, the context here for these programs is that Fix SMTPIO is a proxy. And the premise here is that Qml SMTPD doesn't have to be patched in any particular way or not patched in any particular way. We just put the proxy in front, and the things that you want to have happen, happen. So it's possible that the Qml SMTPD in a given installation has been patched and already supports size. So we have to make sure that that works as it did, or that we fully front it so that it happens to work the same as it would have. Either way, but I have to make sure that it isn't worse because we put a proxy in front. And then there's also the case where the service hasn't been patched, doesn't know about size, and we're going to provide that on its behalf. And so those are all the cases. And that's why I was writing down these scenarios. And let's see if I can just incorporate that in here. Right, support size parameter to mail from even if SMTP or FMTP doesn't. Get it from databytes. Let's just read in the notes from size. Okay. And I guess I'll turn these into just think through each of those three scenarios. Okay. And with that, uh-huh. And so the popular patch for size is right here. It adds an error size so that we can explicitly say, because there is already something called data bytes as a control file. And so we can already read that in and say that it exceeds that in a proactive manner. And this is, I suppose, how that gets determined. It looks like we're parsing mail from, and then we're in SMTP hello, and we would report size as one of the extensions, and an SMTP extended hello. We would call it from there. Okay, yeah, we wouldn't report it in hello because we don't report extensions in hello. That's just where this happens. Yeah, so we would call SMTP size as a further. Yeah, so there are ways, yeah, and then in SMTP mail, which is the mail from kind of thing, then we check if there is such a thing as data bytes and it's non-zero, and we fail the size limit, which was this method up here, then we have that error message and we return. And we can do that before we get to SMTP data. That's the optimization. So this is the standard patch that people who have this implemented in their servers are using, and this would be the inspiration for me merging it in. Will Harris ESMTP size patch. I think that I have a link to this somewhere. Let's see. Guys, size, schwanz.com, source, qmail. Woof. Let's just get the file names. Yes, I think it's going to be in here. Let's see if I have a link to it. Yes. Let's see if that works on screen. Yeah, still there. Okay. So I don't feel a need to keep this patch. Oops. So we'll get rid of that. Good status. We have cleaned out a lot of stuff here. What's remote wrapper? This is a wrapper around qmail remote. This is very easy to reinvent sometime when I need it. I'll just move it under control, which is where I have local copies of control files when I want to run compiled versions of the programs before I commit them. Then that can go in here. It's not exactly a control file, but it's a fine place to not have to think about it. What's in Natman? Oh yes, this is that bug that I've seen. So I'm gonna call that Nathan reporting XSMTPIO bug stuff. I don't think any of this is sensitive. Yeah. Fix SMTPIO. This is just the process tree, and you can see a lot of those, more than are probably real, because they don't die. And top, and then you'll see some, yeah, fix SMTPIO is chewing CPU. So I can reproduce this just as well, but until I fix the bug, I'll keep it here. And how are we doing? DUI versions. What's DUI versions? Right. This is me comparing. What happened to that? Uses a Perl module. It's not present. I believe it was called this. Moment. This is a package source screencast. This is a small Perl module that provides an API to package sources version comparison rules. Now we'll have it. This will work. Let's do that a little nicely. Yeah, so all of these tests pass. Let's look at what they're supposed to mean. Right, so the last version of qmail that was released was 1.03. The last version of netqmail that was released was 1.06. Notqmail deliberately started just after that. But this is a slightly non-standard versioning scheme with no dots in between the 0 and the next number. And so considering numbering notqmail 1.1 or 1.10, what do we expect? If we compare qmail less than netqmail, it should be true, and it is. If we compare netqmail less than notqmail, of course that should be true, and it is. If we compare notqmail is less than notqmail not newer, it's not, and that's the case. So for example, 1.07 is not less than 1.1. And so it would not naively be a good next number in a package source system, or presumably any package system. Um, and then is notqmail less than a number that is for sure newer? Yeah, according to package source, 1.10 is newer than 1.07. And then just to make sure I understand why that's the case, explicitly 1.99 is less than 1.100. Yes, package sources version comparisons would think so. So I guess this was helping me think about future version numbers for notqmail. I guess I can stash that in control as well in case I ever want it again. It doesn't really need to be committed to any tree, but it does seem slightly handy. And where does that leave us? It leaves us with remote utils, which arguably doesn't need to be written down here. Um, I don't have a better place for it right now. And the backlog, which this does seem like the right place for. And I think with that, I'm going to call it. Let's wrap up here. We added a bunch of standalone to-do items into here, and we cleared out the things that were uncommitted. So we're going to say whip that I reverted. And then I can think about that some other time. Rethink at leisure. And redo at leisure. I have a clean enough tree that if I wanted to proceed to do some things, I could do them. And I have a lot of things I want to do. Some of them are the ones we just wrote down. Some of them are the CPU chewing bug and fix SMTPIO has been outstanding for a long time. Every now and then on my server, I have to go in and kill those processes. And I'm not the only person using this code, and I would like other people to have a good experience using this code. And again, I think that bug has been reported very well and fixed very well. So I just need to spend some time on that. I think I'm going to say that this goes first. Um, yeah. So once that's done, I can fix that bug. I have a few other things I want to do in a new release. One of them, the one that I'm the most excited about, besides fixing the bug, is my time says yep. I could go down. Yes. Yep. The thing I'm most excited about adding is that the way this architecture works, which is very elegant and as qmail intended, uh, you can replace the check password program that DJB provided about the system password database with any other check password program. There's just the program has an API. It's a Unixy API. And if you have a different password database you want to be checking against, then use a check password program that does that instead. And what I would like, especially for my mail submission on port 587, I use Dovecot for my IMAP and for a few users that I have. And I also have a few virtual users who are not Unix system users. And I would like to let them submit mail as well. Right now, I could either use Dovecot's mail submission agent instead of all of this, which I would rather not, or I am limited to letting system users authenticate to send messages through our submission service. And granted, everybody who has a virtual account also has a system account, so they do have credentials they can use. But I would like to unify that for every given email account that's set up, it can send with the same credentials with which it can receive. And so for that, using this setup, the only thing I would need to change is to have a check password program that, instead of asking the Unix password database for the answer, asks the Dovecot password database for the answer. And I found some code that purports to do that. And that is what I would like to add to acceptutils next, presuming that it works, or if I have to write my own. Either way, I want to have a program that is available for me to use on my server without any special finicking, that lets the virtual Dovecot users authenticate to send just like they do to receive. And that's one of the things I really want to do. And I think at this point, our next stream could be about that, now that our tree is clean. So thank you for joining me for this tree cleaning session. It was not glamorous, but we did cover a lot of interesting little details. And with that, I will say thanks for watching, and see you next time. Bye-bye.